Some men apologize for showing strength. Others apologize just for having a spine. Have you ever noticed that when you set a boundary, speak your mind, or take up space, you're suddenly saying sorry for simply existing? Like being a man who's awake is somehow wrong. Here's the truth. Nobody teaches you the more you apologize for who you are, the more invisible you become. Quietly and gradually, your standards begin to shrink to fit inside other people's comfort zones. This isn't about becoming rude. It's about remembering who you are, who you were before the world taught you to flinch. Because the man who keeps apologizing for his strength will eventually start apologizing for his worth. And we're done with that. You're done with that. These are 6 things you must stop apologizing for immediately. If even one of them hits you in the gut, don't ignore it. That's not discomfort. It's the sound of your self-respect knocking. If this message resonates with you, consider it your wake-up call. Say it out loud. I owe no apology for who I am. Now let's get into it. Stop apologizing for saying no. There comes a moment in every man's life when he must decide, will he live as a wall or a door? Because if you keep apologizing for saying no, what you're really doing is becoming a revolving door. One that never locks. One that anyone can walk through. And when everyone walks through, don't act surprised when you end up empty. The tragedy is most men don't realize this until it's too late, until their wife takes them for granted, until their friends load them up with one-sided favors, until their boss keeps moving the goalposts and smiling while doing it. Then there you are, tired and resentful, still saying sure with a weak smile. Sometimes worse, a whispered apology. That isn't humility. That's self-betrayal disguised as good manners. I once knew a man named Tom. He was dependable to a fault. The kind of guy who never said no, even when it hurt him. Birthday parties he didn't want to attend. Last-minute projects dumped on him. Family obligations that drained him dry. And when he finally collapsed under the weight of it all, do you know what he said? I should have said no sooner. But by then his peace, his health, and his identity had already been leased out to people who never intended to give them back. Saying no is not aggression. It's not rejection. It's recognition of your limits, your values, and your sovereignty. The Stoics understood this. Epictetus said, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. And the opinion most men carry is this: if I say no, I'll lose people. But the truth is, if someone leaves because you asserted a boundary, they were never really yours. They were renting your kindness at a discount, and you were the landlord who was too afraid to raise the rent. When you say no without apology, you stop bleeding energy. You stop over-explaining your decisions to people who never explain their expectations. And you reclaim something rare in this world: self-command. There's a cultural lie that says being agreeable is the same as being respected. It's not. It just makes you easier to use. You weren't born to please the world. You were born to live in alignment with your values, your time, and your soul. When you betray your truth just to maintain someone else's comfort, that isn't kindness. That's cowardice dressed in politeness. So take a look in the mirror. If the word no makes your chest tighten, there's a crack in your foundation. Seal it. Practice saying no without tone, without excuse, and without emotion. Say it like it's a law, because a Stoic man doesn't bend his principles for praise. He doesn't betray himself just to seem polite. Let others call you cold. Let them say you've changed. Let them whisper that you've grown distant. You haven't changed. You've remembered who you are. And that, my friend, needs no apology. Stop apologizing for needing space. The man who is always available is rarely respected. So stop apologizing for needing space. Did you know the average adult processes over 6,000 thoughts a day? Now imagine trying to work through all of that noise while someone is pulling at your time, your energy, and your focus. Most men don't break because of some great tragedy. They break because of endless interruption, subtle, constant, and exhausting. And even worse, they apologize for wanting to step away from it. In today's world, a man who asks for space is labeled selfish, cold, or emotionally unavailable. But here's the truth. Space is where men heal. It's where they hear themselves again. In the chaos of life between other people's expectations, emotional needs, and constant demands, there is barely any room left to think. And yet every time you try to reclaim that room, society expects you to say sorry. Sorry for turning off your phone. Sorry for not texting back. Sorry for spending a weekend alone in stillness instead of entertaining someone else's insecurity. Here's the hard truth nobody wants to admit: if your need for silence offends someone, they never cared about your soul. They cared about your accessibility. They weren't connecting with your depth. They were consuming your presence. Marcus Aurelius said, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." The Stoics didn't just value solitude, they protected it. But modern men are trained to apologize for it. They're made to feel guilty for unplugging, for being off the grid, for not being emotionally on call, as if always being available is a badge of honor. It's not. It's a leash. There's a pattern here. Men who don't make space for themselves eventually carve out space within themselves for bitterness, for fatigue, for burnout. They show up to events they never wanted to attend. They answer calls they should have ignored. They engage in conversations they weren't ready for. And the more they apologize for needing space, the more people expect them never to need it again. But here's the truth: you are not a machine. Even machines need downtime. The mind, the body, the spirit, all of it requires space from chaos to recalibrate. A Stoic man knows he must step back to move forward. He doesn't retreat in fear. He retreats in mastery. So stop explaining your silence. Stop justifying your stillness. That isn't avoidance, it's alignment. You don't need permission to be quiet. You need quiet to remain powerful. The men who live clear, strong, grounded lives are not the ones who were constantly available. They're the ones who made peace with solitude and refused to apologize for needing it. So next time you feel guilt creeping in when you need space, pause. Breathe, step away from the noise, not with resentment, but with certainty. Because the man who protects his space protects his strength. Men who do not make space for themselves eventually make space within themselves for resentment, fatigue, and slow, silent collapse. They show up to dinners they never wanted to attend. They answer calls they should have ignored. They enter conversations they were not ready for. And the more they apologize for needing space, the more others expect them to never need it again. You are not a machine. You are a man. And even the most powerful machines overheat without downtime. The mind, the spirit, the inner compass, all of it requires distance from the chaos in order to recalibrate. A Stoic man knows that he must step back in order to step forward. He must retreat not in fear but in mastery. Because a man who cannot be alone is a man who does not know who he is without applause or validation. Stop explaining your silence. Stop justifying your quiet hours. That is not avoidance. It is alignment. You do not need permission to be still. You need stillness to remain powerful. The men who live long, clear, and grounded lives are not the ones who were the most social. They are the ones who made peace with solitude and refused to apologize for needing it. So the next time guilt creeps in, pause, breathe, then walk away from the noise, not with bitterness, but with certainty. The man who protects his space protects his strength. Now let us move to the next thing. You should stop apologizing for your standards. Because when you water them down for others, you do not create connection. You lower yourself. Third, stop apologizing for not explaining yourself. There comes a point in a man's life when explanations become more exhausting than action. Yet most men find themselves trapped in a cycle, constantly justifying their boundaries, their decisions, their silence, and their growth to people who have no real interest in understanding them. They explain not to be heard, but to be forgiven for daring to choose themselves. Here is the truth rarely spoken. Not everyone is entitled to your reasons. The world has conditioned men to feel guilty for not offering disclaimers, as if clarity must always be broadcast, as if strength must come with a user manual. But a man walking the Stoic path knows better. He does not chase validation through dialogue. He does not dilute his convictions to make them more palatable. He acts not out of rebellion, but from alignment. You are not a courtroom witness. You are not obligated to make a case for every decision that keeps you sane, grounded, and moving forward. When a man knows why he is doing something, he does not poll the room for approval. He does not unpack his reasoning to people who have not earned access to his inner world. He simply lives and lets the results speak. This is not arrogance. It is sovereignty. There is something quietly powerful about a man who stops defending his growth. A man who no longer fears the discomfort his truth causes others. He is not cruel. He is clean. He makes moves. He sets limits. He closes doors, not for drama, not for attention, but because his life is a system, not a debate, and systems run on clarity, not commentary. The more you explain, the more you imply doubt. And once doubt creeps in, others begin to believe they have a say in your internal council. But your soul is not a democracy. It is a temple, and not everyone is fit to enter. Marcus Aurelius ruled during times of war, plague, and betrayal. He never once wrote his meditations for public understanding. They were reminders to himself, not excuses for others. That is what Stoicism teaches. Hold your truth like a blade, sharp, silent, and unshakable. In the eyes of the weak, a man who does not explain himself may look cold. But in the eyes of the wise, he looks like a mountain, still certain beyond reach. Because when you stop explaining, you stop shrinking. You stop molding your words to fit someone else's comfort zone. Instead, you let your life reveal what your mouth no longer needs to. People will misunderstand you. Let them. They will question your choices. Let them. They will talk behind your back. Let them. You do not owe them a syllabus. You owe yourself a spine. Here is the shift. When you no longer explain, you begin to command. Not by force, but by frequency. A man in alignment walks differently. He speaks less. He reveals less. But his presence says everything. People begin to listen, not because he shouts, but because they sense that nothing about him is up for negotiation. So if you have been explaining your boundaries, your path, your growth, stop. You are not confusing. They are just not calibrated for clarity. Stand in what you know. Be willing to walk alone if that is what it takes to honor your truth. Because a man who trusts his direction does not stop to explain the compass. Now let's go deeper. It is time to confront the fourth thing: you must never apologize for your standards. Because when you lower them to keep the peace, you do not build connection. You bury your worth. Fourth, stop apologizing for success. There is a strange moment that every man faces when he begins to rise. It is not the pressure of ambition or the weight of responsibility. It is guilt, a quiet, creeping guilt that appears when those around him begin to pull away. Their smiles fade, their tone shifts, their support grows silent, and suddenly the man who fought to stand tall feels ashamed for it. Too many men shrink at this moment. They minimize their victories. They downplay their discipline. They laugh off the results of 1,000 silent sacrifices. And worst of all, they apologize not always in words, but in energy. They dim just enough to be tolerated again. But here's the hard truth: you owe no one comfort at the cost of your calling. Years ago, I watched a friend build a business from a broken laptop in a rented room behind a garage. For 5 years, he worked in silence, no weekends, no vacations, no parties, just vision and grit. Then one day he made it. He bought the house, built the team, paid off the debt. And when he tried to share his good news with those who once called him brother, they changed. Some rolled their eyes. Others offered half-hearted congratulations. One even said, "Don't forget where you came from." That phrase stuck with him, not as a reminder to stay grounded, but as a subtle dig, as if success had corrupted him, as if being proud of what he built meant he thought he was better. He started talking less about his wins. He dressed down. He avoided mentioning his goals. Until one day it hit him: he was not being modest. He was being managed. That is when he stopped apologizing. Stoic philosophy teaches that success does not require permission. Marcus Aurelius never apologized for being emperor. He carried the responsibility with humility and presence. Seneca did not seek approval for his wealth. He examined its meaning and used it wisely. Epictetus, born a slave, did not resent those with more. He used his limitations as fuel, not excuses. A Stoic man understands that true success is not just about outcomes. It is about alignment. Success is the evidence of internal mastery. So when a man begins to rise and others begin to recoil, it is not a signal to dim. It is confirmation that the gap between effort and envy has finally become visible. And that gap is not your problem to close. Apologizing for your growth will not help the insecure rise. It only gives them permission to resent you louder. Real men are inspired by excellence. False ones are threatened by it. You do not lower your voice so others can pretend they are equal. You speak with clarity and let the echoes sort themselves out. You speak with clarity and let the echoes sort themselves out. So if you have ever caught yourself making excuses for your results or holding back your ambition to make someone else feel comfortable, stop. That is not kindness. That is self-betrayal dressed up as humility. Let them feel uncomfortable. Let them feel exposed. That is their signal to rise or retreat. Because a man who apologizes for success does not look noble, he looks confused. Now let us move into the fifth thing you must stop apologizing for, and it is deeply misunderstood: your boundaries. Because the moment you ask for permission to draw a line, you have already erased it. Fifth, stop apologizing for outgrowing people. Psychologists have confirmed something the Stoics knew centuries ago. Most people outgrow at least half their social circle every 7 years. Not because of conflict, but because of change. Growth by its very nature creates distance. And yet, when that distance starts to appear, most men feel guilty not for doing anything wrong, but for becoming something more. You outgrow people not from arrogance, but from alignment. The man you used to be had different values, different wounds, different habits. He needed certain people to survive his environment. But when you evolve, you no longer need the same relationships that once anchored your identity. And if you try to stay out of loyalty, guilt, or fear, you do not grow, you rot. The most dangerous form of betrayal is not when others walk away from you. It is when you walk away from yourself just to stay close to those who no longer recognize who you are becoming. Stoicism is clear on this. Epictetus warned, "The key is to keep company only with people who uplift you, whose presence calls forth your best." There is no virtue in clinging to familiarity that now breeds spiritual suffocation. Holding on to people who are only loyal to your former self is not loyalty, it is denial. What makes this harder is how subtle it feels. You find yourself censoring your growth. You avoid talking about your goals. You hear phrases like, "You've changed," spoken, not with admiration, but with accusation. And instead of owning your evolution, you flinch. You backpedal. You feel the urge to apologize. Do not. The truth is, your transformation is not a betrayal. It is evidence that the inner work is taking root, that the man you were no longer fits in the places you used to bend for. That is not ego, that is clarity. The man on the Stoic path does not apologize for momentum. He moves forward with reverence for what was, but with zero guilt for what must be left behind. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." And sometimes bravery is not found in battle, it is found in silence. In walking away from a connection that no longer reflects your principles. In leaving the echo chambers that once felt like home, but now only echo your former limitations. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to demand more from your environment. You are allowed to let go of relationships that whisper shame when you speak of growth. And no, you do not need to host a debate about it. You do not need to justify your expansion. You simply need to move like water away from containers that can no longer hold you. So the next time someone makes you feel guilty for evolving, remember this: if they were truly for your rise, they would not mourn the old you. They would stand in awe of the new one. And if they cannot, they were never part of your future. Only a chapter in your past. Now let us explore the final thing you must stop apologizing for: your intensity. Because a world addicted to comfort will always try to soften men who refuse to live small. 6, stop apologizing for taking the lead. There is a reason most men never step into leadership. It demands exposure. The moment you take the lead, you stop blending in. You stop hiding behind groupthink. You make decisions, take risks, and accept responsibility. And in a world where comfort is worshipped and accountability is avoided, that makes people uneasy. But their unease is not your burden. When you lead, you will be misunderstood. Weak men will call you controlling. Insecure people will call you arrogant. Passive observers will say you are too much. But here is what they will not say: he waited. He begged for consensus. He dimmed himself for our comfort. Because a Stoic man does none of that. A real man does not lead to dominate. He leads to protect clarity. He moves forward when others stall. He stays calm when others panic. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. And being one means stepping forward without flinching, without apologizing, and without looking back for approval." The disease of modern masculinity is chronic hesitation. Men asking permission to lead their own lives, apologizing for having vision, diluting their instinct because someone in the room looks uncomfortable. But Stoicism was never a philosophy of politeness. It was a philosophy of power under discipline. Seneca warned, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. And nothing is wasted faster than time spent waiting for others to be okay with your strength, especially when that strength is quiet, principled, and firm." You do not need a badge to lead. You do not need a title. You need clarity. You need conviction. And you need the courage to stand alone in the fire when no one else is willing to move. That is leadership. And if you feel guilty for having it, you are still letting others narrate your worth. Leadership is not about being liked. It is about moving with integrity even if the room does not clap, especially when the room does not clap. Epictetus wrote, "Seek not that events should happen as you will, but rather will that they should happen as they do, and you shall have peace." That means a Stoic does not ask the crowd to understand his vision. He aligns with reality. He acts with discipline. He bears the weight of direction without apology. There will always be voices telling you to slow down, to soften, to shrink. Not because you are wrong, but because your momentum reminds them of their own stagnation. Let them sit. Let them gossip. You move. Because when a man leads with principle, not ego, he does not become a tyrant. He becomes a lighthouse. And if your light offends those still lost at sea, let them drown in comfort. Now we close with one reminder. Every Stoic man needs you do not need to explain. You do not need to justify. You do not need to bow. You simply need to walk in truth unapologetically. Let us call it what it is. Every unnecessary apology is a slow erosion of your spine. A man who constantly says sorry for his needs, his values, or his space is not being polite. He is disappearing piece by quiet piece. And the worst part, the world does not even notice because you trained it not to. But that ends now. You do not owe the world your silence just because it is louder than your clarity. You do not need to shrink to fit someone's fragile comfort zone. And you certainly do not need to say sorry for standing tall in a world that prefers men kneeling. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, "The best revenge is to be unlike the one who caused you harm." So stop apologizing. Start aligning. If this message cut deep, good. That means it hit something real. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below, "I walk forward without apology." You weren't born to tiptoe around life, and yet somehow you've been conditioned to say sorry for having standards, for setting boundaries, for standing tall. But here's the hard truth. Every unnecessary apology chips away at your strength. And over time, it doesn't just silence your voice, it rewrites your identity. In this brutally honest video, we break down 6 things a Stoic man should never apologize for, no matter how uncomfortable it makes others. Because true character isn't about pleasing the room, it's about owning your space in it. Marcus Aurelius didn't apologize for clarity. Epictetus didn't flinch at truth. And you're not here to play small for approval you don't need.